A strange thing happened in England last week. Jeremy Corbyn, a left-wing socialist, a campaigner for every decent cause in the world, a staunch supporter of the Bolivarian experiments in South America, and a great admirer of the late Hugo Chavez, was elected leader of the British Labour Party. Everyone was shocked. Nobody had thought, when Corbyn decided to contest the leadership of the Labour Party, that he would win. And yet, stranger things have happened. And as we reported on this programme, when we covered the British election, I remember saying that two different things had happened. The right had won England and the left had won Scotland. And what happened in Scotland spread to England, unseen, unnoticed, and it spread via those secret networks that young people have when they can communicate with each other, sometimes without even texting or sending messages. Because though the English establishment parties tried to play down what had happened in Scotland, it had a huge impact on the young. They saw, not so far away on these islands, young people in Scotland engaged day after day after day with political discussions, political debates, which way to go, and finally deciding to go with the Scottish National Party, the SNP, and pouring into its ranks, even though they had lost the referendum for independence. And then the Scottish contingent came into the British Parliament, and one of its members, Mhairi Black, made one of the most electrifying maiden speeches in the House of Commons, the British Parliament. That speech had an impact all over the world, and it had an impact in England.
In this budget, the Chancellor also abolished any housing benefit for anyone below the age of 21. So we are now in the ridiculous situation whereby, because I am an MP, not only am I the youngest, but I am now also the only 20-year-old in the whole of the UK that the Chancellor is prepared to help with housing.
So Jeremy Corbyn decided to stand for the leadership of the Labour Party after the resignation of his defeated predecessor. He never thought he would win. He knew that inside the parliamentary Labour Party, there wasn't much support for him. He wouldn't even have got the nomination had not a few Blairites having fun or thinking it was good to have a token leftist in order to show how diverse and generous the party was, let him run. They'd done so previously in other years, and the left had been defeated overwhelmingly, smashed, destroyed. This time it was different. Why? Because the Labour Party leadership, in order to show the Conservatives and the hardcore right-wing Blairites inside the Labour Party that they were moving as far away as they could from trade union influence, decided to open up the ballot to non-members who could become members by paying £3 and join the party and participate in its vote. Now, the assumption here was very clear. They assumed that if they did this, the bulk of people who would join would be centrists or people from the right who wanted to influence the Labour Party, and that it wouldn't change anything. It would just marginalize the trades unions. In fact, what happened was the exact opposite. Large numbers of young people joined the Labour Party, over 250,000. and decided to influence how the election was being run. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the left, a tiny left inside Parliament, suddenly became the most sought-after Labour politician in the country. His meetings were attended by tens of thousands of people. He did something no other Labour Party leader had done for many decades. He encouraged young people and old people and anyone to come to these meetings, to hear him, to discuss with him, to listen to his policy solutions, his fight against austerity, his anti-war policies, and the crowds became larger and larger and larger. And in some towns, they had to have overfill halls and people standing on the pavements. It was the Scottish effect on English politics. I had noticed these things in Scotland, not in England. And the results, when they came, didn't surprise anyone. Whereas at the beginning, Corbyn himself would have been amazed to win. By the time the campaign ended, it was obvious he was going to win, because the Parliamentary Labour Party, whose ranks largely consisted of office boys and girls selected by Blair and Brown and Miliband, who had come into Parliament with very little experience, were largely visionless, couldn't impress anyone, and were seen, even by people who supported them, as not very encouraging. I mean, Blair and Brown, whatever you say about them, and I've critiqued them for a long, long time, were serious politicians. The people they created in their own mold couldn't do the trick. And so you saw, week after week, these three somewhat pathetic new Labour politicians and Jeremy Corbyn, much older than them, in his 60s, with white hair, just telling the truth. And the one thing that even Corbyn's enemies acknowledge about him is that he is a deeply honest man. He has the lowest expenses in the House of Commons, incorruptible, has been loyal to his beliefs and his principles for a long, long time. I've known him 40 years and spoken with him in those 40 years countless numbers of times, sharing platforms on the Iraq war, anti-austerity, against the proposed war on Syria, on Palestine, where he feels very strongly that what Israel is doing is unacceptable, etc., etc., etc. And now these views that he had cultivated for the last 40 years were heard by a generation that was completely amazed. Jeremy said that many young people who came to speak to him after these meetings asked him, is it really true that once upon a time in this country, students didn't have to pay tuition fees? That there was public housing, that you could be put on the list for getting a council house in London? And he said, yes, and we'll do it again. And this amnesia that has been created by the functioning of the two extreme centre parties under Blair, Brown, Cameron, Thatcher, suddenly began to evaporate as people realised an alternative was possible.
And we're going to be campaigning together, particularly on the crucial issue of housing in London. I am fed up with the social cleansing of London by this Tory government and its policies. The Tories have used the economic crisis of 2008 to impose a terrible burden on the poorest people in this country. Those that have seen their wages frozen or cut, those that can't afford to even sustain themselves properly, those that rely on food banks to get by. It's not right, it's not necessary, and it's got to change. We need an economic strategy that improves people's lives, that expands our economy, that reaches out to care for everybody. You can't do that if at the same time you do nothing about grotesque levels of inequality within our society. We need to develop an economic policy that deals with those issues. And so our party is about justice, is about democracy, it is about the great traditions we walk on.
And so it happened that Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party on the first round. He had more votes, 59% plus to be precise, than all his three opponents put together. Now, what does this prove? It shows us that the Parliamentary Labour Party does not represent the views of its members, especially the new members, but also many old ones. And so I think we're going to see turbulent times ahead. What has been the result of Corbyn's victory? The British Prime Minister said that Labour now constitutes a security risk. This is the level of English democracy at the moment. Labour constitutes a security risk because almost 60% of the Labour Party has elected a new radical leader. The so-called security risk is that Jeremy Corbyn wants to ditch the Trident missile, which costs billions, which is utterly useless, and which wouldn't even be able to defend these islands in the case, a science fiction reality, not real, of a Russian attack, or I don't know who else wants to attack these islands, nobody. So what's the big deal? So the main function Trident serves is actually helping the American arms industry. There's no other function. And the billions used on these missiles could be used to create more jobs, to build more homes, to make sure the hospitals don't go under, especially in the areas where the Trident missiles are currently being built and worked. So what's the big deal? How does this present a security risk? Or could it be that Jeremy Corbyn's critical remarks on the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has really got them worried? Well, Britain isn't going to leave NATO unless Corbyn wins a huge political victory at the next general elections. If he does, on a program saying he's going to withdraw from NATO, then there's no answer. He will do it. But if he doesn't, if that isn't in the party program, then he won't. But this threatening tone, this aggression that comes not just from David Cameron and the Tories, but from within the Labour Party, by the Labour right, who feel that their sense of entitlement has been taken away. Most of the people who refuse to serve under Corbyn would be much happier serving under David Cameron. If you look at them, if you see what they stand for, you can see very clearly and understand that these are effectively people who would be happy with the Lib Dems or David Cameron, but who cannot stomach a party which is returning to its roots. So the big contradiction is this. Jeremy Corbyn is the most left-wing leader elected in the history of the British Labour Party. You can go through all these leaders. Keir Hardie, the founding leader, supported the First World War after initially opposing it, and Labour joined the war cabinet of Lloyd George. A war that everyone knew was destructive and useless and cost the lives of millions of European workers and others. Labour started off badly. This was followed by Ramsay MacDonald, who effectively deserted his own party on the question of benefit cuts. Remember that. That was the big fight. and the Labour Party as a whole refused to support the benefit cuts of the Conservative government. Ramsay MacDonald, the Labour leader, did, took a large chunk of the party and joined the Tories to form a national government. His successor in the Labour Party was George Lansbury, from Poplar in London's East End. Very decent man, but mainly concerned with tending to the wounds of the Labour Party, curing them. His problem was that he was a pacifist. And being a pacifist, leading a party 2 years after Hitler's victory and the triumph of Nazism in Germany was not a very clever idea. So he was removed from office by his own party, which correctly felt that the Nazis had to be fought, and fought with arms. And the last thing they needed was a pacifist leader. Subsequently, after the Second World War, we had Clement Attlee, great reformer, pushed through the formation of the National Health Service, education reforms, housing reforms, but supported dropping nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, supported the British Empire in Malaysia. I still remember seeing a newspaper with Labour members of Parliament sent on a delegation to Malaysia, looking at the decapitated heads of communist guerrilla fighters whose uprising and rebellion they had helped to crush. Not very good on the foreign policy front. The next Prime Minister was Harold Wilson, who supported the war in Vietnam, took a long time making up his mind on what to do in Rhodesia, was generally cautious in foreign policy, though even he managed to redistribute some wealth to the less well-off. After Wilson, prior to Blair, there had been Neil Kinnock, pretty ineffective, very good at hammering the left inside the Labour Party and expelling Trotskyists from the Labour Party. That was his big victory, but incapable of defeating the Tories. Tony Blair came to power after doing a deal with Gordon Brown that they would share power. Politically, they were Thatcherites. And from 1997 to 2015, their politics and their policies dominated the Labour Party. No one on the left, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, or anyone else, said we're going to leave. I think they were wrong, but maybe not, as it turns out. And they accepted it and carried on functioning. But the minute Jeremy Corbyn is elected, what do we see? Threats. We'll pull out, we'll withdraw, we'll leave you. Well, the sooner the better, if that's your opinion. But do one thing, those of you who want to leave. Put yourself before the British electorate in the seats from which you stand. Just like those Conservatives who left to join UKIP, the party of the far right, resigned their seats. One got in, one didn't. So any Labour members who wish to leave the Labour Party should, out of decency, if not legality, resign their seats and stand again as Tories or independent candidates or lovers of Tony Blair or worshippers of Gordon Brown or whatever. And then let's see which way people are going. How is Jeremy Corbyn's victory being treated abroad? From South America have come congratulations. Cristina Kirchner, the president of Argentina, sent a very warm message. And all the solidarity campaigns with Venezuela, with Ecuador, with Bolivia have played a big part in mobilizing support for Corbyn in this campaign. So there's no problem there. In Palestine, Jeremy Corbyn's victory has been welcomed as he is a long-standing supporter of the struggle of the Palestinian people, not allied to any of the organizations in there, but of the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination. So it will be welcomed there too. In the Arab world, many Arabs will welcome Corbyn's victory. At long last, in one of the major countries of Europe, there is the political leader now of a mainstream party who understands what they're about and agitates against Britain going to war. Within the European Union, there will be nervousness, because Corbyn has said that he is critical of the European Union. He's not said that he will pull out of it, he said he's critical of it. And as we know, the European Union is not used to or tolerant of criticism by politicians who are technically part of it. It would be foolish to retreat on this, and I hope he doesn't, because the notion that there is anything progressive about the European Union is, of course, now a complete joke. This is an undemocratic, bureaucratized entity which crushes movements and peoples with which it doesn't agree, as we saw in Greece only recently. So criticism of the EU is essential over the next years. In Germany, in France, in other countries, the establishment will be nervous, and they will be sending message to their friends in the Labour Party asking, is this serious? Might the infection spread? Might we be caught up in it? Might this have an impact on us? There is fear. Pablo Iglesias, the leader of Podemos, of course, has welcomed Corbyn's victory and said we now have a strong voice against austerity in Britain as well. So the responses vary depending on who you ask, but that it has marked an important shift cannot be disputed.
I think it's quite incredible the way the mood in Europe has changed over the past few weeks of understanding that people fleeing from wars, they are the victims of wars, they are the generational victims of war, they're the intergenerational victims of war, end up in desperation, end up in terrible places, end up trying to gain a place of safety, end up trying to exercise their refugee rights. They're human beings just like you, just like me. Let's deal with the refugee crisis with humanity, with support, with help, with compassion, to try to help people who are trying to get to a place of safety, trying to help people who are stuck in refugee camps, but recognize going to war creates a legacy of bitterness and problems. Let us be a force for change in the world, a force for humanity in the world, a force for peace in the world, and a force that recognizes we cannot go on like this with grotesque levels of global inequality, grotesque threats to our environment all around the world, without the rich and powerful governments stepping up to the plate to make sure our world becomes safer and better, and those people don't end up in poverty, in refugee camps, wasting their lives away when they could be contributing so much to the good of all of us on this planet. We are one world. Let that message go out today from this conference centre here in London.
It's difficult at the moment to predict how this is going to turn out. But one thing is obvious. The contradictions are glaring. We have the most left-wing leader ever elected by Labour, at the same time as we have the most right-wing parliamentary Labour Party ever, probably, in the history of Labour. How are these going to function? Of course, there are some members of Parliament who are bandwagon careerists and who might clamber onto this bandwagon. Who knows? But the most important question is this, and this is what the Conservatives, the right-wing media, the bulk of the Parliamentary Labour Party are asking quite openly. Is Corbyn's win a reflection of the fact that people don't care if they're elected or not? This is the question. What is the answer? Difficult to tell. We don't know. But viewers in South America will recall that when Evo Morales, Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa stood for election, the entire media and right-wing politicians and oligarchs denounced them savagely. And it was predicted that with all this opposition, they could never win. But they did. And here the South American lesson is important for the Labour left. You have to build a mass movement. You have to keep that mass movement going. You have to rely on that mass movement and not the politics of the bubble in which media and political cliques unite to try and distract you, to tire you out, to punish you. If Corbyn stands firm on the core policies that he has outlined, ending the privatizations of the railways and the utilities, ending the punishment of students, especially students whose parents can't afford to pay the tuition fees, creating a new public housing project all over the country, and uniting, when necessary, with the Scottish National Party and the single Green Member of Parliament to push through these measures, the results could be surprising. I think Jeremy Corbyn could win the next election, provided the mobilizations outside are continued. These will be attacked. People will say, this is not the British way. But actually it is the British way. The British, or the English rather, were the first Europeans to execute their king, well before the French and the Russians. The British were the first to set up a movement for democracy, Chartism, which fought and fought and fought together with suffragettes later on to win adult franchise for men and women in this country without any qualifications whatsoever. So when they want to, the English can rise and do things. Nobody thought, myself included, that this opportunity would come again so soon, but it's on us. And so there's no point in attempting too many compromises. Some have to be done if you are leading the Labour Party. One has to accept that. But on the core issues, the movement must fight. And with this new influx of members, very similar to what happened to the SNP. The day Jeremy Corbyn was elected, 14,500 people joined or rejoined the Labour Party. Now, utopians and purists will say, but wouldn't it be better if this was not the Labour Party? Yes, it would be better, but it isn't, because there was no other alternative. So young people decided to go into the Labour Party to help elect a new leader who broke with the past and hopefully to re-elect Labour as a government under a different leadership and with different policies. If they succeed over the next 4 years in carrying this out, British politics will have registered a huge shift to the left, just like Scotland. So, what started in 1999 in South America will have reached Europe in 2020 if Jeremy Corbyn wins. Of course, it's a huge if, as everything is in this wretched world, but it's possible. And what one can say is that both the young generation of today and the older generation, now in its 60s, like Corbyn himself, hope has been reborn in England. And who had thought that was possible?